I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring to find my beautiful cedar fence covered in bright orange spray paint, and I knew immediately that someone had lost their mind. The fence had cost me nearly $3,000 to install just 8 months ago, custom-built with premium cedar boards that I had carefully stained a rich mahogany color to complement my house in our Phoenix, Arizona neighborhood. Now it looked like someone had taken a can of construction, marking paint, and gone absolutely wild, spraying crude lines and splotches across a 20-foot section that faced the street. My name is Marcus Webb, and I had lived in the Sunset Ridge community for 2 years. It was one of those planned neighborhoods where every house looked vaguely similar, with strict rules about lawn maintenance, paint colors, and apparently everything else under the sun. The Homeowners Association was run by a woman named Patricia Hendricks, though everyone called her Pat, and she took her volunteer position more seriously than most people take actual paying jobs. Pat was 53 years old, with that particular hairstyle where the hair is cut short and styled with so much product that it looks helmet-like, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, like some kind of badge of office. I stood there in my driveway, my work bag still slung over my shoulder, staring at the vandalism in complete disbelief. The orange paint was still wet enough that I could smell the chemical odor hanging in the air. My neighbor, Ed Martinez, was outside watering his lawn and had noticed me standing there frozen. "Marcus, did you see what happened?" Ed called over, turning off his hose and walking toward the property line. "I heard some commotion earlier, maybe around 2 o'clock, but I was in my home office on a conference call and could not step away." "No, I just got home," I said, walking closer to examine the damage. "This is insane. Who would do something like this?" Ed looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Listen, I do not want to start anything, but I saw Pat's car parked on the street around that time. I remember because I thought it was weird that she was just sitting there." That seemed strange but not impossible. Pat had been on my case for weeks about various supposed violations. First, it was that my grass was a 1/4 inch too long. Then she claimed my mailbox was the wrong shade of black, even though it was the exact same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. Most recently, she had sent me a formal violation notice about my fence, claiming that the stain color was not approved and that I needed to repaint it to match the community standards, which was ridiculous because I had checked the guidelines before building it. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the damage from multiple angles. The spray paint covered portions of about 15 fence boards, with some areas getting hit worse than others. Whoever did this had not been artistic about it, just seemingly angry and destructive. The orange color was aggressive and ugly against the dark mahogany stain, and I could already tell that this was not going to be a simple fix. "I am calling the police," I said, more to myself than to Ed. "This is property damage, plain and simple." "You might also want to check if you caught anything on camera," Ed suggested. "Do you have security cameras?" I felt a surge of hope. I had installed a Ring doorbell camera 6 months ago, and I had also put up 2 additional security cameras after there had been some package thefts in the neighborhood. One camera covered my front door and porch, another covered the driveway and side yard, and the third was mounted on the corner of my garage, angled to capture the front fence line and the street. If someone had vandalized my fence in broad daylight, there was a very good chance I had it on video. "Yes, I do," I said, already pulling up the Ring app on my phone. "Give me a second." I scrolled back through the timeline to around 2 in the afternoon. The app showed several motion-triggered recordings from that time period. I tapped on the first one, which was from the garage camera, time-stamped at 1:47 p.m. The video showed my quiet street, with nothing happening for several seconds, and then Pat's silver Lexus SUV pulled into frame and parked directly in front of my house. I watched as Pat herself got out of the driver's side, looked around quickly, and then walked to her rear hatch, opening it up. "Oh my God," I muttered, and Ed leaned in to see my phone screen. The video continued, and we watched as Pat pulled out a can of bright orange spray paint from her vehicle. She walked directly up to my fence, shook the can a few times, and then started spraying. The footage was crystal clear, showing her face, her car with the visible license plate, and every single motion she made as she vandalized my property. She worked quickly, spraying random lines and splotches across the fence boards, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to see if anyone was watching. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes, and then she tossed the spray paint can into some bushes near my fence, got back in her car, and drove away. "Holy crap," Ed said, his eyes wide. "She actually did it. Patricia Hendricks vandalized your fence." I saved the video and immediately made a backup copy, emailing it to myself for safekeeping. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from pure anger. This woman, who was supposed to be a neutral party enforcing community rules fairly, had deliberately damaged my property. This was not just a violation of HOA ethics or whatever, this was an actual crime. I called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me an officer would be out within the hour to take a report. While I waited, I went through all my camera footage from that day, making sure I had everything documented. I also took more photos of the fence, the spray paint can that Pat had thrown into my bushes, which still had her fingerprints on it presumably, and the general scene. Officer Rachel Campos arrived about 45 minutes later, parking her patrol car in my driveway. She was professional and thorough, listening as I explained what had happened and showed her the video evidence on my phone. Her expression shifted from neutral to surprised when she watched Pat spray painting my fence in broad daylight. "That is pretty clear footage," Officer Campos said, making notes on her tablet. "Do you know this person?" "She is the HOA president for our neighborhood," I explained. "We have had some disputes recently. She sent me a violation notice a couple weeks ago claiming my fence stain was not approved, which was not true. I think she did this to force me to repaint it, or maybe just out of spite." Officer Campos walked over to examine the fence and the spray paint can. She used a pen to carefully pick up the can by the nozzle, dropping it into an evidence bag. "This is clearly criminal damage to property. Given that you have video evidence showing the suspect's face and vehicle, this should be straightforward. I will write up the report and forward it to the prosecutor's office. You should also document the cost of repairs for restitution purposes." "So she will be arrested?" I asked. "Someone will follow up, likely a detective or the prosecutor's office will issue a summons," Officer Campos said. "With evidence this clear, she will definitely be charged. You will probably get a call from the prosecutor within a week or two." After Officer Campos left, I called 3 different fence companies to get quotes on repairing the damage. The first company, Arizona Fence Pros, sent someone out that same evening. The estimator, a guy named Tony, examined the fence carefully and took his own photos. "Yeah, this is not a simple fix," Tony said, shaking his head. "That orange paint has soaked into the cedar pretty deep. We could try to sand it down and restain, but you would probably still see ghost marks where the paint was. The better option is to replace the damaged boards entirely and then restain everything to match." "How much are we talking?" I asked, though I already knew it was not going to be cheap. Tony did some calculations on his tablet. "For materials and labor, to remove 15 boards, install new cedar boards, and restain the entire front section to make sure it all matches, I am looking at about $1,650. That includes hauling away the old boards and disposal fees. I thanked Tony and waited for the other two quotes to come in over the next day. One company quoted $1,800, and the other quoted $1,500, but with a longer timeline. I went with Arizona Fence Pros because their quote was fair and they could start work within 3 days. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA. My stomach dropped when I saw the return address, though I should not have been surprised. I opened it to find yet another violation notice, this time claiming that my fence was now in violation due to the spray paint, and that I had 10 days to bring it into compliance or face fines of $50 per day. The audacity was breathtaking. Pat had vandalized my fence herself, and now she was threatening to fine me for it. I immediately scanned the letter and added it to my growing folder of documentation. I also typed up a formal response letter, which I planned to send certified mail right back to the HOA. 2 days later, on Thursday afternoon, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. I checked the Ring camera and saw a man in khakis and a polo shirt holding a folder. I opened the door to find Detective James Kowalski from the Phoenix Police Department Property Crimes Unit. "Marcus Webb?" he asked, and I nodded. "I am following up on the criminal damage report from Tuesday. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I invited Detective Kowalski inside, and we sat at my kitchen table. He reviewed the video footage again on his laptop, where he had already downloaded a copy from my police report. He asked me detailed questions about my history with Pat and the HOA, taking notes on everything. "This is one of the more clear-cut cases I have seen," Detective Kowalski said. "We have video evidence. We have the spray paint can with potential fingerprints, and we have a clear motive based on the prior disputes. I am going to recommend that the prosecutor file charges for criminal damage, which in Arizona for damage between $1,000 and $10,000 is a Class 5 felony." "A felony?" I asked, surprised. I had assumed it would be a misdemeanor. "Yes, because the damage cost exceeds $1,000, Detective Kowalski explained. "If convicted, she could face probation, restitution, and possibly jail time, though for a first offense she would more likely get probation and community service. The prosecutor might also offer a plea deal to reduce it to a misdemeanor if she agrees to pay full restitution." After Detective Kowalski left, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that the police were taking this seriously, but another part of me could not believe that things had escalated this far over a fence. I had moved to Sunset Ridge because it seemed like a nice, quiet neighborhood where I could build a life. Instead, I had become entangled in this bizarre conflict with an HOA president who apparently thought vandalism was an appropriate enforcement tool. The fence repair started on Saturday morning. Tony and his crew showed up at 8 a.m. sharp, and they worked efficiently, removing the damaged boards and installing fresh cedar replacements. By early afternoon, they had the new boards up and were starting the staining process. I watched from my living room window, sipping coffee and catching up on some work emails. Around 2 p.m., Pat's silver Lexus pulled up across the street. I watched as she got out of her car and stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, glaring at my house. Tony and his crew ignored her, focused on their work. After about 5 minutes, Pat marched up my driveway. I met her at my front door before she could ring the bell. "Can I help you, Patricia?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Her face was flushed red, and she pointed an accusatory finger at me. "You know exactly what you did. Filing a false police report is a crime, Marcus. I could have you arrested." "There was nothing false about it," I said calmly. "I have you on video spray painting my fence. The police have the evidence. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer." "That video does not show anything," Pat sputtered, though her eyes betrayed her panic. "It could have been anyone. That is not proof." It shows your face, your car, and your license plate, I said. Look, Patricia, I do not know what you thought would happen here, but you vandalized my property. That is a crime. You are going to have to face the consequences. This is harassment, Pat said, her voice rising. I am the HOA president. I was doing my job enforcing community standards. Your fence was in violation. My fence was not in violation, and you know it, I said firmly. And even if it was, the HOA process is to send notices and levy fines if needed, not to commit vandalism. You broke the law, Pat. She opened her mouth to respond, but Tony called over from the fence line. Hey, buddy, you want me to call the cops? This lady is trespassing and harassing you. Pat shot Tony a furious look, then turned back to me. You have not heard the last of this, she said, before storming back to her car. I watched her drive away, then walked over to where Tony was putting the finishing touches on the stain work. Sorry about that, I said. She is the one who did this in the first place. No kidding, Tony said, raising his eyebrows. That is wild. Well, the fence looks good as new. We should be wrapped up in about an hour. By late afternoon, my fence looked perfect again. The new boards blended seamlessly with the existing ones, and the fresh stain had brought back that rich mahogany color I loved. Tony handed me an itemized invoice for $1,650, which I paid with a check. He also gave me a detailed receipt and a written statement describing the work performed, which I knew I would need for court. The following week was relatively quiet, though I noticed Pat driving past my house slowly several times, always slowing down to stare at my fence. I also received another certified letter from the HOA, this one claiming that I had made unauthorized repairs without submitting the proper architectural review application. It was absurd, but I dutifully responded in writing, pointing out that I was repairing vandalism damage and that no architectural review was required for like-for-like repairs per the HOA's own guidelines. On Wednesday, 12 days after the incident, I received a call from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. The prosecutor assigned to my case, a woman named Jennifer Ortiz, introduced herself and explained that they were moving forward with criminal charges against Patricia Hendricks for Class 5 felony criminal damage. The evidence is very strong, Jennifer said. We have offered Miss Hendricks a plea agreement where she would plead guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge, pay full restitution of $1,650, complete 40 hours of community service, and resign from the HOA board. She has 2 weeks to accept the offer or we proceed to trial. What are the chances she accepts? I asked. Hard to say, Jennifer admitted. Some people are reasonable and take the deal. Others are stubborn and want their day in court, even when the evidence is overwhelming. We will see. Either way, you will be kept informed of all proceedings, and you have the right to provide a victim impact statement. I thanked Jennifer and hung up, feeling like maybe justice would actually be served here. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to focus on normal life, going to work at my job as an IT consultant, maintaining my yard to HOA standards out of sheer spite, and generally trying to put the whole mess out of my mind. Then I got another call from Jennifer Ortiz. Mr. Webb, I wanted to let you know that Miss Hendricks has rejected the plea offer. Her attorney has filed a motion to suppress the video evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally, and they are planning to fight the charges. We have a preliminary hearing scheduled for next month. My heart sank. I had hoped this would be resolved quickly and quietly, but apparently Pat was going to drag this out. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means you will likely need to testify at some point, Jennifer explained. The preliminary hearing is mostly procedural, but if this goes to trial, you will definitely be called as a witness. I will prepare you for that when the time comes. In the meantime, just keep all your documentation organized. The preliminary hearing was held at the Maricopa County Superior Court on a Tuesday morning in early July. I took the day off work and dressed in business casual attire, not sure what to expect. Jennifer met me outside the courtroom and walked me through what would happen. "This is just to establish probable cause that a crime occurred," she explained. "The judge will review the evidence and decide if there is enough to proceed to trial. With video evidence, this should be straightforward." Inside the courtroom, I sat in the gallery and watched as Pat entered with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Richard Brennan. Pat looked smaller somehow, less confident than when she was marching around the neighborhood with her clipboard. She wore a conservative navy dress and minimal jewelry, clearly trying to look sympathetic. The hearing was brief. Jennifer presented the video evidence on a large monitor, and I watched the judge's face as he observed Pat clearly spray painting my fence. Detective Kowalski testified about the investigation and the evidence collected. Richard Brennan tried to argue that the video did not definitively show his client's face, which was laughable given the clarity of the footage, and that I might have edited the video somehow. Judge Thomas Martinez was not buying it. "Counsel, I can clearly see the defendant's face in this video, along with her vehicle and license plate. Unless you have evidence that this video was doctored, which you have not presented, I am finding probable cause for the charge of criminal damage. This case will proceed to trial." Richard Brennan requested a jury trial, which Jennifer had expected. A trial date was set for September, about 2 months away. As we left the courthouse, I felt exhausted even though I had barely done anything except sit and watch. "How are you holding up?" Jennifer asked as we walked to the parking garage. "I just want this to be over," I admitted. "This has taken over my life. I am getting nasty emails from other HOA board members accusing me of attacking Pat. Some of my neighbors are not talking to me anymore. It is like I am the bad guy for reporting a crime." Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, that is common in these types of cases, especially when it involves someone in a position of authority. Just remember that you did nothing wrong. She vandalized your property, and she is facing the consequences of her actions. Stay strong." Over the summer, the situation in my neighborhood became increasingly uncomfortable. The HOA held a special meeting to discuss the situation, though I was not invited, which was probably a violation of the bylaws itself. Ed told me that the meeting had been contentious, with some residents defending Pat and claiming she was being persecuted, while others argued that she had clearly broken the law and needed to step down. The HOA board voted 3-2 to keep Pat on as president during the pending criminal case, with the caveat that she would step down if convicted. The 2 board members who voted against her, Ed told me, were Sarah Chen and Miguel Rodriguez, who both lived on my street and had seen the video evidence. I received another violation notice in August, this time claiming that my lawn had weeds, which was true but trivial since everyone's lawn had a few weeds in the Arizona summer heat. I dutifully pulled the weeds and sent photographic evidence to the HOA, copying Sarah and Miguel just to make sure there was oversight. Meanwhile, Jennifer was preparing for trial. She called me several times to go over my testimony, coaching me on how to answer questions clearly and directly, how to handle cross-examination from Richard Brennan, and what to expect from the trial process. She also sent me a victim impact statement form, which I filled out describing the financial and emotional impact of Pat's vandalism. The trial began on September 15th, a Monday morning. The courtroom was one of the smaller ones in the Maricopa County Courthouse, and the jury box held 12 ordinary-looking people who had been selected after a day and a half of voir dire, which I had not been present for. I sat in the gallery behind Jennifer's table, watching as Judge Martinez entered and called the court to order. Jennifer's opening statement was concise and effective. She explained that the evidence would show Patricia Hendricks had deliberately vandalized my fence in broad daylight, that the act was captured on video surveillance, and that the damage had cost $1,650 to repair. She characterized it as a clear-cut case of criminal damage motivated by a personal vendetta. Richard Brennan's opening statement tried to paint Pat as a dedicated community volunteer who had been wrongly accused. He suggested that the video was not as clear as the prosecution claimed, that I might have had ulterior motives for framing Pat, and that there were reasonable doubts about who actually committed the vandalism. It was a stretch, and I could see some of the jurors looking skeptical. The prosecution's case took up most of the first day. Jennifer called Detective Kowalski to the stand, who testified about the investigation, the video evidence, and the spray paint can that had been recovered. The fingerprint analysis had come back with Pat's prints on the can, which was damning evidence that Richard tried unsuccessfully to exclude. Then Jennifer called Tony from Arizona Fence Pros, who testified about the damage he had observed and the cost of repairs. He brought photos and the detailed invoice, walking the jury through each line item. Richard's cross-examination tried to suggest that the repairs were unnecessarily expensive, but Tony calmly explained that replacing cedar boards and restaining was the only way to properly fix the damage. Finally, Jennifer called me to the stand. I was nervous, my palms sweating as I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Jennifer led me through my testimony gently, asking me to describe my relationship with the HOA, the prior disputes with Pat, discovering the vandalism, and reviewing the video evidence. Mr. Webb, when you first saw your fence that day, what went through your mind? Jennifer asked. I was shocked and angry, I said. I had spent a lot of money on that fence and someone had just destroyed it. I could not understand who would do something like that. And when you reviewed your security footage, what did you see? I saw Patricia Hendricks getting out of her car, taking a spray paint can from her vehicle and deliberately spray painting my fence. It was clear and unmistakable. Jennifer played the video for the jury again, and I watched their faces as they observed Pat committing the crime. Several jurors looked disgusted, while others just looked sad that someone would do something so petty and destructive. Richard Brennan's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to suggest that I had somehow manipulated the video, though he had no evidence of this, and I explained that the Ring system stores videos in the cloud with timestamps that cannot be altered. He tried to suggest that I had provoked Pat somehow, and I calmly explained that all I had done was build a fence according to the guidelines and refused to change it when she demanded it. Mr. Webb, is not it true that you and Miss Hendricks had multiple confrontations before this incident? Richard asked. We had disagreements, yes, I said. But those disagreements were always about HOA rules, and they were never physical or threatening. I never did anything to provoke her to vandalize my property. But you admit that there was tension between you. Yes, there was tension because she kept sending me violation notices for things that were not actually violations. I think she did not like that I pushed back on her authority. Richard tried a few more angles, but Jennifer had prepared me well, and I stayed calm and factual in my responses. After about 30 minutes, Richard gave up and I was excused from the stand. The prosecution rested, and then Richard began presenting Pat's defense. It was weak from the start. He called Pat to the stand, and she testified that she had been in the neighborhood that day, but claimed she had not spray painted my fence. When Jennifer played the video during cross-examination, Pat incredibly tried to claim that it was not her in the video, despite the clear footage showing her face. Miss Hendricks, is that your silver Lexus SUV in the video, license plate number 7TYP492? Jennifer asked. Pat hesitated. Yes, that is my car. And is that you getting out of the driver's side? It looks like me, but I cannot be sure. You cannot be sure if that is you? Jennifer's tone was incredulous. Miss Hendricks, are you seriously testifying under oath that you do not know if that is you in the video? Pat's attorney objected, but Judge Martinez overruled him. Pat stammered, I mean, it could be someone else. Maybe someone borrowed my car. Did someone borrow your car that day? I do not remember. Jennifer pulled out phone records showing that Pat had made a call from her cell phone shortly after the time stamp on the video, with the cell tower ping placing her in my neighborhood. She pulled out receipts showing that Pat had purchased orange spray paint from a Home Depot 2 days before the incident. Every piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin. Richard tried to rehabilitate his client on redirect examination, but the damage was done. Pat's testimony had been evasive and unconvincing, and it was clear that the jury was not buying her story. The defense rested without calling any other witnesses, and closing arguments began on the second day of trial. Jennifer methodically walked through each piece of evidence, showing how they all pointed to Pat's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Richard tried to argue that there were alternative explanations, but his heart did not seem to be in it. He knew his client had lost. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreperson, an older Hispanic man, announced the verdict: guilty on 1 count of Class 5 felony criminal damage. Pat gasped audibly, and her shoulders slumped. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though I took no pleasure in seeing another human being convicted of a crime. This whole situation had been unnecessary and stupid, caused entirely by Pat's inability to accept that she could not control every aspect of the neighborhood. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Judge Martinez remanded Pat on her own recognizance, but ordered her to have no contact with me or my property. The local news picked up the story, running a piece about the HOA president convicted of vandalizing a homeowner's fence. And suddenly, my quiet neighborhood drama was public knowledge. The news coverage was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it validated what I had been saying all along, that Pat had broken the law and deserved to face consequences. On the other hand, it brought unwanted attention to my street, with news vans occasionally parked outside and reporters knocking on doors asking for comments. The HOA held an emergency meeting and finally voted to remove Pat from the board. Sarah Chen was elected as the interim president, and one of her first acts was to send me a formal apology on behalf of the association. She also dropped all pending violations against me and returned the $50 fine I had paid months ago for the supposed mailbox color issue. Sentencing day arrived on October 7th. I returned to the courthouse, this time feeling less anxious and more resigned to whatever would happen. Jennifer had told me that, for a first-time offender, Pat would likely receive probation and be ordered to pay restitution, but the judge could also impose jail time if he felt it was warranted. Pat looked defeated as she stood before Judge Martinez for sentencing. Her attorney made a plea for leniency, arguing that Pat had no prior criminal record, was a respected member of the community, and had made a terrible mistake in judgment. He asked for a deferred judgment that would allow Pat to avoid a felony conviction on her record if she completed probation successfully. Jennifer argued that while Pat had no prior record, her crime was premeditated and malicious, and she had shown no genuine remorse, even lying on the stand during trial. She asked for a sentence that included probation, substantial community service, and full restitution. Judge Martinez listened to both sides, then asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood and walked to the podium, my prepared victim impact statement in hand. Your Honor, this whole experience has been incredibly stressful and disruptive to my life, I began. I moved to Sunset Ridge to have a peaceful home in a nice neighborhood. Instead, I have spent the last 6 months dealing with vandalism, legal proceedings, and hostility from some of my neighbors who think I should have just let this go. But I could not let it go because what Patricia Hendricks did was wrong. She broke the law, and she did it because she did not like that I stood up to her. If she had gotten away with it, who knows what she would have done next, to me or to other homeowners who dared to question her authority. I hope that whatever sentence you impose sends a message that people in positions of power cannot abuse that power to harass and intimidate others. Judge Martinez nodded thoughtfully. He looked at Pat, who was staring at the floor, and then he delivered his sentence. Miss Hendricks, you held a position of trust in your community, and you violated that trust in the worst possible way. You vandalized a homeowner's property out of spite and personal vendetta, and then you lied about it under oath. While I acknowledge that you have no prior criminal record, your conduct in this case was egregious and shows a fundamental disrespect for the law and for your neighbors. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 3 years of supervised probation, 160 hours of community service, and you are ordered to pay full restitution to the victim in the amount of $1,650. You will also pay court costs and fees. Additionally, I am ordering that you have no contact with Mr. Webb and that you are permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board. If you successfully complete probation, I will consider reducing this conviction to a misdemeanor. Do you understand the sentence? Pat nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor, and Miss Hendricks, let me be clear. If you violate any terms of your probation or if you have any contact with Mr. Webb, you will be brought back before me and you will face jail time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Pat said quietly. After the sentencing, Jennifer walked me out of the courthouse. How do you feel? She asked. Honestly, I feel relieved, I said. I did not want to see her go to jail, I just wanted her to be held accountable, and she was. You did the right thing by reporting this and following through, Jennifer said. A lot of people would have just repaired the fence and tried to move on, but then she would have gotten away with it. You stood up for yourself. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal. Pat paid the $1,650 restitution through the court, and I received a check that fully covered my fence repair costs. She quietly moved out of the neighborhood about a month later, selling her house to a young couple with 2 kids who seemed much friendlier. The new HOA board, led by Sarah Chen, was night and day compared to Pat's regime. Sarah focused on actual community building rather than nitpicking enforcement, organizing neighborhood barbecues, and a holiday light contest. The tension that had hung over Sunset Ridge for years seemed to dissipate almost overnight. Ed told me that several other homeowners had come forward after Pat's conviction, sharing their own stories of harassment and questionable enforcement actions. One woman had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of beige on her house, even though she had receipts showing it was the approved color. Another guy had been threatened with legal action for parking his work truck in his own driveway, despite there being no rule against commercial vehicles. It turned out Pat had been abusing her authority for years, and my case had finally exposed her. I also received an apology from several neighbors who had initially sided with Pat. One guy, Steve, came over with a 6-pack of beer and said he was sorry for assuming I was just trying to cause trouble. We sat on my porch and talked for a couple of hours, and I realized that a lot of people had just been intimidated by Pat and were afraid to speak up. The spray paint incident became something of a neighborhood legend. At the holiday party that December, which was the first one I actually enjoyed attending, several people joked about it in a good-natured way. Someone even gave me a gag gift, a framed photo of my fence with a label that said, "Most controversial fence in Sunset Ridge history." Looking back on the whole ordeal, I learned several important lessons. First, that documentation is everything. If I had not had those security cameras, I never would have been able to prove what Pat did, and she would have gotten away with it. Second, that standing up to bullies, even when it is uncomfortable and costly, is the right thing to do. And third, that HOA boards need oversight and accountability just like any other organization with power over people's lives. My fence, for the record, still looks beautiful. The cedar has weathered nicely over the past year, and the mahogany stain has deepened to a rich, warm tone. Every time I pull into my driveway and see it, I feel a little bit of pride, not just in the craftsmanship, but in the fact that I stood my ground and refused to be bullied. The criminal case officially closed in January when Pat successfully completed her first few months of probation, and the court processed all the restitution payments. Jennifer sent me a final letter thanking me for my cooperation and wishing me well. I filed it away with all the other documents from the case, a thick folder that I hope I will never need to look at again. The new couple who bought Pat's house, Jessica and Ramon, turned out to be great neighbors. Ramon is an architect, and he actually complimented my fence, saying it was one of the best-looking custom cedar fences he had seen in the area. I told him the story behind it, and he laughed in disbelief. "Man, that is crazy," Ramon said. "We moved here from Temp specifically because this neighborhood seemed so peaceful. I guess we missed all the drama." "Trust me, you are better off," I said. "It is peaceful now, though," and it was. The spring brought new flowers to the neighborhood, and Sarah organized a community garden project in the little park at the end of our street. People were actually talking to each other again, helping with yard work, and looking out for one another. It felt like a real community, instead of a collection of houses governed by an authoritarian HOA president. I even started volunteering on one of the HOA subcommittees, the Landscaping and Beautification Committee, because I wanted to make sure the new board stayed focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. It was actually kind of fun to have input into decisions about what kind of trees to plant along the main boulevard, or what color scheme to use for the neighborhood entrance sign. One afternoon in March, almost exactly a year after the spray paint incident, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. I looked up to see a woman I did not recognize getting out. She was probably in her 30s, professionally dressed and carrying a folder. "Marcus Webb?" she asked, and I nodded cautiously, wondering if this was some new legal issue. "My name is Amanda Pierce. I am a reporter with the Arizona Republic. I am doing a story on HOA abuse and accountability, and I heard about what happened to you last year. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated, then agreed. We sat on my porch, and I walked her through the whole story, from the initial disputes with Pat through the criminal trial and eventual conviction. Amanda took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions. "What do you think needs to change about how HOAs operate?" Amanda asked. I thought about it for a moment. "I think there needs to be better oversight and easier ways for homeowners to challenge bad decisions. In our case, Pat had almost unchecked power because the other board members were either intimidated by her or just did not want to deal with the conflict. There was no mechanism for homeowners to remove a board member who was abusing their authority except waiting for the annual election. And by then, a lot of damage can be done. What would you say to other homeowners who are dealing with similar situations? Document everything, I said immediately. Every interaction, every violation notice, every conversation. And invest in security cameras if you can afford them. That video evidence was the only reason I was able to prove what happened. Also, do not be afraid to stand up for yourself, even if it is uncomfortable. A lot of HOA bullies count on people just rolling over to avoid conflict. Amanda's article ran a few weeks later, a long investigative piece about HOA abuse across Arizona. My story was featured prominently, with quotes from me, Jennifer the prosecutor, and even Judge Martinez, who spoke about the broader issue of people in volunteer positions abusing their authority. The article sparked a conversation in the state legislature about HOA reform, and several bills were introduced to increase transparency and accountability. I do not know if any of those bills will pass, but I was glad to contribute to the conversation. Change happens slowly, especially when it comes to laws and regulations, but at least people were talking about the problem. As summer approached again, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed in just over a year. I had gone from being a quiet guy who just wanted to enjoy his home to someone who had stood up against injustice, and won. It was not a role I had ever expected to play, but I was proud of how I had handled it. My fence, the source of all this drama, continued to stand solid and beautiful. I had added some climbing roses along the base, and they were starting to grow up the cedar boards, adding splashes of color. Neighbors walking by often complimented it, and I always thanked them with a smile. One evening in late May, I was grilling in my backyard when Ed came over with his wife, Maria. We had become good friends through all the craziness, and they often joined me for impromptu cookouts. "You know what the best part about all this is?" Ed said, sipping a beer and looking at my fence. "That fence is going to outlast all of us. Long after we are gone, that fence will still be standing and nobody will remember the drama. They will just see a really nice fence." I laughed. "That is a weirdly profound thought, Ed." "I have my moments," he said with a grin. We stood there in the golden Arizona sunset, the smell of burgers on the grill, cold beer in hand, and I realized that Ed was right. The fence would outlast the drama. Life would go on. The neighborhood would continue to evolve and change, and eventually this whole crazy story would just be a footnote in Sunset Ridge history. But for now, in this moment, I was content. I had fought for what was right, justice had been served, and my property was intact. Sometimes that is all you can ask for. The criminal case had lasting implications beyond just my situation. Sarah told me at a board meeting that the HOA's insurance company had conducted an audit after Pat's conviction, and found several other instances where she had potentially exceeded her authority or acted inappropriately. The insurance company mandated new training for all board members and implemented new checks and balances to prevent any one person from having too much power. These changes were good for everyone. The HOA started publishing detailed minutes from board meetings online, created an anonymous hotline for reporting concerns about board member conduct, and established a formal appeals process for violation notices. It was not perfect, but it was a vast improvement over the old system where Pat had essentially ruled by fiat. I also heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Pat was struggling with the consequences of her conviction. The felony on her record, even though it might eventually be reduced to a misdemeanor, had cost her several job opportunities. Her community service hours were being served at a homeless shelter, which I hoped might give her some perspective on real problems versus obsessing over fence colors and lawn heights. I did not take any pleasure in her suffering, but I also did not feel particularly bad about it. She had made her choices, and choices have consequences. If she had just followed the proper HOA procedures, or better yet, if she had not been such a petty tyrant in the first place, none of this would have happened. As fall arrived again, marking nearly 18 months since the spray paint incident, I found myself thinking less and less about the whole ordeal. It had become just another chapter in my life, something that had happened and been resolved. The fence was just a fence again, not a symbol of conflict or a source of stress. I had even started dating someone, a woman named Claire who I met at a work conference. When I told her the story of the fence, she laughed so hard she nearly spit out her wine. "You are telling me an HOA president spray painted your fence and got convicted of a felony for it?" Claire asked, still giggling. "That is the most suburban drama I have ever heard." "Welcome to my exciting life," I said with a grin. "I mean, it is kind of romantic in a weird way," Claire said. "You are like a hero standing up to tyranny, except the tyranny is about fence colors." "When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous." "It is ridiculous," Claire said, "but you still did the right thing, and that ultimately was what mattered." In a world where it is often easier to just go along to get along, to avoid conflict even when you are in the right, I had chosen to stand up for myself and for what was fair. It had cost me time, stress, and emotional energy, but it had been worth it. My neighborhood was better because of it. The HOA was better because of it. And I was better because of it, more confident in my ability to navigate difficult situations and advocate for myself. The fence stood tall and strong, a testament to quality craftsmanship and to the principle that property rights matter. The rich mahogany stain had weathered beautifully, and the cedar boards had developed that silvery patina at the edges that comes with time and exposure to the elements. It was exactly what I had envisioned when I first decided to build it. And every single day when I came home from work, pulling into my driveway and seeing that fence, I smiled. Not because of the drama or the vindication, but because it was my fence on my property and nobody had the right to destroy it. That principle, simple as it was, had been worth fighting for. The story could have ended there, with justice served and life returning to normal. But there was one final coda that happened in December, just as the holidays were approaching. I was putting up Christmas lights on my house, carefully draping them along the roofline in white leads, because those were HOA approved, when a delivery truck pulled up. The driver handed me a certified letter, which I signed for with a sense of trepidation. Certified letters had not brought good news in the past, but this one was different. It was from Patricia Hendricks's attorney, Richard Brennan, and it contained a brief letter and a cashier's check. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Webb, my client, Patricia Hendricks, has asked me to convey her sincere apologies for the damage she caused to your property, and for the distress her actions caused you and your family. While she has already paid court-ordered restitution, she wanted to provide an additional payment to cover any incidental costs you may have incurred that were not included in the original damage estimate, such as your time off work, increased insurance premiums, or other expenses. She understands that no amount of money can undo what happened, but she hopes this gesture demonstrates her genuine remorse. She is committed to completing her probation successfully and learning from this experience. She wishes you well and asks that you accept this payment in the spirit it is intended." The cashier's check was for $500. I stood there on my ladder, holding the letter and the check, trying to process this unexpected development. Part of me was skeptical, wondering if this was some kind of legal maneuver or if Pat's attorney had just told her to do this to look good for her probation officer. But another part of me wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Pat had actually learned something from all this. I climbed down from the ladder and went inside, thinking about what to do. I could certainly use the $500, especially with the holidays approaching and having just bought Claire a nice gift. But accepting it felt weird, like it was closing a chapter that I had already closed in my mind. After thinking about it for a day, I decided to cash the check and donate the money to a local charity that helped homeless families, the same place where Pat was doing her community service hours. I wrote a brief note back to Richard Brennan explaining what I had done and thanking his client for the gesture. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to take something negative and turn it into something positive. Sarah from the HOA board told me later that Pat had indeed shown up for every single one of her community service hours and had apparently been a model volunteer, working hard and not complaining. Her probation officer had given positive reports at her 3-month and 6-month reviews. Maybe people really could change. As Christmas approached, the neighborhood looked beautiful with lights and decorations. The community had come together in a way that felt genuine and warm, nothing like the tense, rule-obsessed atmosphere of the previous year. Kids were sledding on the small hill in the park using trash can lids because we did not get enough snow for real sleds. Families were visiting each other for holiday parties. It felt like what a neighborhood should feel like. On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Ed and Maria came over along with Sarah and her husband Tom, Ramon and Jessica and Claire. We drank mulled wine, ate too many cookies, and told stories about the year that had passed. "You know what I am grateful for," Sarah said at one point. "That we all learned something from what happened. We learned that community matters, that we need to look out for each other, and that having rules is fine, but being rigid and authoritarian about them is not. Marcus, I know it was hard for you, but you really did make this neighborhood better." I raised my glass. "Here is to better neighborhoods, reasonable HOAs, and fences that do not cause criminal trials." Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. Claire squeezed my hand, and I looked around at these people who had become my friends through adversity and community. The fence outside stood silent in the cold December night, its cedar boards strong and true, the mahogany stain rich even in the dim light from the Christmas decorations. It was just a fence, really. Wood and nails and stain. But it had become something more, a symbol of standing up for what was right, of refusing to be bullied, of believing that rules and laws apply to everyone equally. And in the end, justice had prevailed. Pat had been held accountable for her actions. I had been made whole through restitution. The neighborhood had reformed its governance. And life had moved on, better and stronger for having gone through the fire. As midnight approached and my guests prepared to leave, Ed pulled me aside on the porch. "Hey, I never properly thanked you for what you did. A lot of us were scared of Pat but did not know how to stop her. You showed us that it was possible to stand up to her. You gave us courage." "I was just protecting my property," I said, though I was touched by his words. "It was more than that," Ed insisted. "You stood on principle, that matters." After everyone left and Claire and I were cleaning up, she asked me if I had any regrets about how everything had played out. I thought about it carefully before answering. "No," I finally said. "I mean, I wish none of it had happened in the first place. I wish Pat had just been a reasonable person and we could have all lived in peace. But given that she chose to vandalize my fence, I do not regret reporting it or following through with prosecution. She needed to be held accountable, and the neighborhood needed to see that nobody is above the law. Even HOA presidents," Claire added with a smile. "Especially HOA presidents," I agreed. As I locked up the house and turned off the lights, I took one last look through the front window at my fence, now barely visible in the darkness, except where the Christmas lights cast a faint glow. It had been a long, strange journey from that Tuesday afternoon when I came home to find orange spray paint across my beautiful cedar boards. But we had made it through. The fence had been repaired. Justice had been served. The neighborhood had healed. And I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing, but that does not make it any less right. Tomorrow would bring a new day, and next year would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But for tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. My home was safe, my property was intact, and my community was strong. And that fence, that beautiful mahogany-stained cedar fence, would stand for decades to come, long after everyone had forgotten about the drama and the trials and the spray paint. It would just be a really nice fence in a really nice neighborhood, which is all I had ever wanted it to be. The end.